time to talk about the budget, but first, we're gonna do a proclamation. Scroll back up here. We're gonna proclaim the week of May 14th through the 20th as Police Week and Monday, May 15th as Peace Officers Memorial Day. Do we have representatives to speak? Maybe? Are we not starting from the top?
It's work session.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't at the very top.
We're not ready. Sit down and fight for everything you want like the rest of them.
Actually, Mayor, that's very indicative of what we've done to his budget this year. Just sit down, Tara.
All right, well, okay. So now I'm at the very top of the agenda. Got a little box to read first. The work session provides an opportunity for the City Commission to discuss items in greater detail. As a general practice, the Commission will not make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Public comment related to the work session topics will be allowed at the end of the discussion on each item, but we only have one item, and that would be the budget. All right.
It's all ours.
It's.
Okay.
Do you want me to read it? I can read it.
No. So there's some changes between this year and last year's budget document. This year's document is 115 pages. We didn't have to kill the ash tree that we used to build this particular document. It was already suffering from ash borer. This one, which is a 440 some pages, we actually took down a sequoia for this particular one because high quality paper was necessary. Somebody said, what are you, where's all the detail? And what we're trying to do initially is kind of get you to a higher level of decision-making, not into all the line item kind of detail. And last year we infused capital improvements program. This year we're kind of trying to get you to a more programmatic approach to things, looking at things from decision points and making decisions based on your priorities. And you're going to see how we infused the strategic plan into this document. The process was started a little bit earlier this year, and the reason for that is because while I watched the process last year and we had a lot of public input very early on, I think that there's some confusion about the process that we go through. First off, this document is the city manager's recommended budget. Before it's all done, it becomes the city commission's budget by approval of the commission. And it seems to me that a better way to get citizen engagement is give them something to take a hard look at in terms of what the recommendations are, and then take their feedback on that if they have differences of opinion. But to start with what the city manager recommendation is. That's the way it works in the council manager form of government. Therefore, we've started a lot earlier this time around, just so you had a chance to get that engagement going with your public. So it's a little bit different approach than what you've seen in the past. So with that, I'm going to talk about things. And last year, the kind of the term of the budget discussion that I tried to invoke was context. And this year, I'm going to try and invoke the term equity, both internal and external. And I'll try to be gentle in how I approach it so as not to offend parties. But I think there's some factual information that when you do the math on some of these issues, it's important for you to understand how that balance in terms of equity plays out in terms of the taxpayers here in Lawrence. So we'll start off. The document. It's a new budget process, allows for the following: strategic planning, specific priority initiatives, view of the larger picture. Financial commitments are all made in the context of the budget. Sets us on a path for priority-based budgeting to be implemented with the 2019 budget process. And that's one of our identified strategic plan initiatives for, as a result of our strategic planning process. So how did we start that? Remember when this discussion took place amongst the commission said, well, let's get this going for 2018. You don't just go into PBB with, just jump into it. There's some training that's necessary to accomplish that. So the staff from the various departments got together and actually met and viewed a webinar all about PBB. And it's one in a three-part series that our staff will be going through. So we're gearing up to get into an understanding of how PBB works, how it links to our strategic plan, the goal connections, and all of those things. So a lot of public may not understand what PBB is. It's also known as reality-based budgeting. It's the practice of developing budgets based on the relationship between program funding levels and expected results from that program. Administrators can use PBB process to develop more cost-efficient and effective budgeting outlays for the long term. So it's a very different approach. We, quite frankly, used a budgeting technique that was probably more likened to line item budgeting, which goes back to the 60s. Then there was zero-based budgeting. Then there was incremental or target-based budgeting. Then there was performance budgeting. Then there was program budgeting. And then in the mid-2000s, there was results-based budgeting. And now we have priority-based budgeting. I actually think that this is an evolution of the budgeting process. And everything I know about PBB so far, I think it aligns quite well with the contextual conversation we had last year, your direction as a part of the recruitment profile for a new city manager to do strategic planning. All of those things I think are coming into alignment. And quite frankly, it causes you to make tough decisions because you have to weigh your resources against all the requests for funding and services and all of that. And we had those kinds of discussions in strategic planning. So let's talk about the recommended budget. Recommended budget is almost $200 million at 199.8 million, or 198.8. General operating fund is structurally balanced. All other funds are balanced within a 5-year financial forecast. That's another one of those strategic initiatives that's included in your strategic plan. So it's now been infused into your budget document. It does include a mill levy rate increase of 1.25 mils in the debt service fund. And you'll notice it says for the police facility. And I want to point something out. I don't think it's necessarily fair to tack the millage entirely on the police facility, because just this last year we spent, or will be spending, $6 million on the rehab of Fire Station 1 and the Senior Center. We're committed to $2.5 million for a new animal shelter with a matching fundraiser from the Humane Society for $5 million. And this year we're spending $700,000 for a new fire burn training center. So my point to you is all of those things push that up. Part of the challenge we've had with the police facility here is it's such a big number that it's hard to really bite down to, the concept of how do we get this done. And so I've talked about phasing it. I've talked about an incremental approach to it. I think the police department is on board with that. We're trying to work that out. And I'll get into that discussion a little bit more. But one of the other things I want to talk about is how we might collaborate with the county so that we share a site for both the county sheriff and the local police department. And I think there's a lot of merit in doing that, but it has to work its way through the governance process of both jurisdictions. It preserves core city services, one of the things we talked about in strategic planning, and it shifts funding to the 7 critical success factors. It includes the 5-year capital improvement program. And to be fair, you did budget for capital improvements previous to last year's budget, but last year's CIP was probably the first comprehensive look at CIP across all funds, not just general obligation debt for the upcoming year. And it was for 5 years. And you made some pretty strong definitions of what constitutes a capital improvement. So I would say that last year was the first year, the first approach to really getting into full-blown capital improvement programming. And as you recall, it created a certain tension or friction, which honestly is going to happen when you introduce those things. But over time, you're going to gain a comfort level with having to make those tough decisions in the public venue, which is where those decisions need to be made. So as a part of this budget, we had a number of personnel adjustments. We've added one technical support position for the implementation of the body-worn cameras. This will be a position that will probably be funded for about a half year. We figure even though this is budgeted for 18, we probably won't get this all implemented until after halfway through the start of that next budget year. So that's how we're planning a half year in this, to subtly bring that in. We want to add a part-time municipal court security position in the city attorney's office, but it's actually for the court. That would be 2 people. That's not the full-blown metal detector walk-through system that you think it might be. It's actually kind of a interim step to have security there, and maybe a little beefed up security, knowing the law is changing regarding carry of firearms. The recommendation does include the elimination of the city auditor position. I would say to you this afternoon, I don't want to get into a lot of the detail with that, in part in deference to Michael Oglinski. He lost his father here recently, and I think it would be appropriate to wait on that discussion to a later time in the budget process, for which we have time to consider that later on. Eliminate the 1 vacant code enforcement position, eliminate 2 vacant solid waste loader positions, in part because of technology development. Eliminate 1 vacant administrative support position in the finance utility building, eliminate 1 vacant communication manager position. You know that Porter has assumed the responsibilities of joint cultural art director and communications director, and we're changing that department around, so the net result will be the reduction of 1 staff position. Eliminate 3 vacant field service positions, eliminate 1 vacant golf pro assistant position, and eliminate 1 vacant administrative support position at the SBL. The plus minus in all of that is 9 positions. Add 2, subtract, I think 11, so the net is a 9 reduction. And we will continue to look at that. Obviously, attrition is a much easier approach to changing, the construct of how many employees are serving us. It's always difficult to be in a position where you're laying somebody off, terminating employment. Employee compensation and benefits. Here's an issue that I kind of put in that realm of equity a little bit, and that is, you can concentrate a lot on operations and you can skip over infrastructure. And to some degree, I think we're guilty of that. And the longer you let infrastructure go, the more the maintenance is going to accrue, the more you're going to have to spend on operations. So we always need to keep a balance between our infrastructure investment and our operational costs. And quite frankly, we hear these conversations from our employees. When are we going to get this piece of equipment, or when are we going to get this improvement, in terms of a facility? And at the same time, we want to be paying fairly and equitably at the same time. So that's an equity issue. MOU agreements are as follows. The Firefighters Association is on a 4-year agreement that will expire in 2019. That adjustment was about a 2.5% general wage adjustment. The Lawrence Police Officers Association is a 3-year agreement that will be expiring in December of 2018. That's a 1.75% GWA for police officers and a 1% adjustment for detectives. The non-MOUs this last year were in their 3% range, and the recommendation for next year is 1%. Healthcare, initially, the recommendation out of the Healthcare Committee was a 12% increase. We've come back and said that we want to get it down to 7%, and we intend to do that by looking at competition and looking at maybe pricing some things a little differently than we currently do in terms of benefits that are included in our insurance package. So we'd like to get that back down to 7%. Capers and KP&F, I think that's an average of a 12.8% increase contributions for those two pension systems. Longevity, my recommendation is a reduction in longevity pay from $48 per year to $24 per year for eligible employees. That results in almost a $280,000 across all fund savings. There is some language issues in terms of our MOU on that, and we'll have to get into a discussion about that at some point during the budget process. The strategic plan overview outlines a systematic approach for moving forward. You've all seen the vision statement. I won't go through that again. It drives our budget decisions. We adopted 7 critical success factors and 8 priority initiatives. I am going to go through the priority initiatives just to remind everybody, and these are things that we want to accomplish over the next couple of years. Inventory and evaluate the role of existing advisory boards and commissions. Diane is heading that up, and she'll be coming back with recommendations in terms of how we can consolidate and make that a more efficient operation. Review the city's practices for ongoing professional development and align efforts to achieve excellence around the commission priorities. Identify barriers to having high-speed fiber throughout Lawrence and facilitate the development of the necessary infrastructure. We've recently met with our new cable company. They seem very positive about expanding fiber throughout the community. They have in other places they're located, so we're looking forward to working with them about getting equal access to fiber throughout our community. Review 9th Street plans and develop a proposal to complete the road infrastructure. You'll notice the CIP has funding, I think, in the range of $2.5 million for that street improvement. It also counts eventually on Art Place funding, and I think that was in the $300 to $350 range in terms of dollars, that we're hopeful that the Arts Center and others can work with us to see if that can be infused in a project. Develop a city facility master plan and comprehensive facility maintenance plan. We're working on those types of things. You know, an example of that, of course, is my conversation earlier about police and sheriff's facilities being combined. Develop a plan to implement priority-based budgeting. You already know that's underway. Develop and communicate long-term financial strategy. That's already a part of this budget, so that's underway. Develop a master plan for downtown that includes needed and desired assets, infrastructure, and uses. And just today, you received a letter asking for $200,000 in funding for a farmer's market facility. I would say that, and you notice in that letter, if you haven't had a chance to read it, it says that they have not picked a site, they've not determined a site. This downtown master plan would be the place for that to be discussed and cited so that it fits with the entire plan of the downtown area. So hopefully, if it's going to be in the downtown, hopefully they're understanding of that, and we can make a commitment to work on that going forward. I'm not going to go through the critical success factors on that list, but I will go right into some of the items that relate to that as a part of this budget. Effective governance and professional administration, there's $110,000 for development of the downtown master plan, $60,000 for the facility assessment management system. This gets back into that planning process for probably a utilization study on our facilities, consolidation potential for our facilities, site location types of decisions for us on our facilities. $71,000 increase to get to a one-stop shop. We haven't decided whether we're going to actually put the one-stop shop solely on that first floor. We'll be coming back to you with a lease. But this contemplates, you know, the difference between the two leases we currently have, one for the east side of the Riverfront Plaza and the other one for the municipal court building, and then figuring out if we can infuse it in there, maybe municipal court in here, maybe move municipal court back into the court building. We have some options there that we're evaluating at this time. But the $71,000 comes about as a net of those leases that get shifted over to the lease on the first floor. And so we're still in negotiation. You'll see that yet this spring. $120,000 for Family Leave Act and HR software. Safe and healthy, welcoming neighborhoods, there's $1,365,000 for social service agencies. That's the same amount as last year, $300,000 in bond proceeds for affordable housing. This budget, you'll see later on, also talks about a portion of the sales tax renewal being committed to affordable housing as well. Maintains our rental registration program, assumes CDBG and home funds will continue, but knowing what Trump's blueprint looked like, budget blueprint, we're going to have to be actively engaged in lobbying for that to make sure that continues on. 5.4 million budgeted for parks with a total of 13.6 committed to all of Parks and Rec. 2.4 of that comes from the county sales tax. And 450 for sidewalks, bike, pedestrian, ADA ramps. Innovative infrastructure and asset management, $30,000 is committed for operations and maintenance of the newly acquired Santa Fe Depot, at 10.9 for transit operations capital infrastructure, 6.6 for cash-funded street maintenance, EcoFlow Rapid Rainwater Reduction Program, and for those that don't remember, that's a comprehensive multi-year, multi-phase find and fix program to investigate and reduce rainwater entering the city's sanitary sewer system from public and private sources. Now you know what it is. Continued funding for the Emerald Ash Borer program. Commitment to our core services. There's $2.19 million for water and wastewater maintenance out of a total of a $49 million utility budget, $49,000 for the part-time security guard position at the municipal court, $450 for the body-worn camera and a tech support position, and $700,000 for construction of the new burn training tower at Fire Medical. In terms of sound fiscal stewardship, our financial forecasts, long-range forecasts are included in the budget. Upgrading of software to improve efficiency aligned with industry best practices. Finance internal service tracking software, payment kiosk is being talked about, OpenGov budget tracking and reporting software, and Invisio, which will help with our strategic planning, tracking, and reporting software. That's what kind of software that is. 25% of general operating fund balance, which aligns with industry best practices. And I skipped our bond rating of AA1 because one of the key elements of maintaining a good bond rating is making sure that you keep your fund balances healthy. And again, the 25% is what our target is, and we hope to have that kind of fund balance as a part of our ongoing budget this year. Collaborative solutions. Anticipated $6.4 million will continue to be received, actually possibly even more, from the Douglas County for the emergency medical services provided by the Combined Fire Medical Services. $300,000 for the Bioscience and Tech Business Center. $400,000 for the roof replacement at the Lawrence Arts Center. $360,000 for the Lawrence Humane Society. That's separate and distinct. That's an operational amount that we pay on an annualized basis. $120,000 for the K-10 connector. And this is another where we have an external issue of equity. So you know, based on articles in our conversation recently, that Johnson County wishes us to participate at a level more akin to the ridership that is using the K-10 connector from Lawrence and Douglas County. And so we're trying to have that conversation. This budget includes the 120, which is the same amount that we've been talking about. I did call the county administrator after the meeting and indicated we had this conversation and that we would, during the period after budget, we'd start a conversation about a kind of a long-range look at a more equitable funding stream. $200,000 for Peaslee Tech Training Center. That's a bit of a bump, although it's, you know, the net effect is we actually reduced the request from last year. I think last year's request was in the range of 195. We funded 150. I've come back and recommended the 200 this year. I think the big challenge for Peaslee is the long-term situation, and I've said it before. I think we've kind of side-saddled into this process, and unfortunately, I think the problem with that is we have some looming expenses, especially long-term. If in fact we were to do a 50-50 proposition with the county, which has been suggested, I'm not necessarily there yet, but it's about $1.6 million. So between the two of us, we'd have to come up with an $800,000 just to retire. That's the mortgage, just to take out the mortgage. And the mortgage actually has a balloon due on January of 18. So our efforts are to get that extended to some level and see if we, in the interim, we can't go into a long-term agreement with Peaslee. And I'm just going to comment about, Diane and I sat down, we went through a list to see, the types of issues that we'd like on the table for this discussion. Get the mortgage delayed until long-term agreement can be worked out. Identify countywide funding source, preferably property tax, typical funding source for education. Backup is sales tax, obviously. Agreement to investigate the possible designation as a tech college, which would require some discussion with the Board of Regents, or satellite community college for tech training. Continue to fund on a 50-50 city-county basis operational expenses exclusive of major capital expenditures. Get commitment to fund from the private sector. I'd really like to see us get to a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 between the parties. And that may take some doing on the part of the business community, but maybe there's some way that we can front with a commitment from them to backfill over time to get them into a 1/3, at least as to the capital portions and mortgage issues. Ongoing items, Peaslee Tech to pursue school districts for funding. Of course, this is replacing some of those things that used to be high school auto lab and other kind of tech services that historically school districts used to provide. With the passage of the recent bond issue, maybe they can figure out how to squeak us some money to at least help rebuild parts of that. They have located their facility up on the hill with the Peaslee Tech, so maybe we can figure out some collaboration there where they can help fund. Peaslee Tech to lead a public discussion regarding funding implications of different funding scenarios. And by that I mean, I don't think our public really understands this conversation about Peaslee. I think they know about Peaslee. I don't think they have the understanding of how this is going to be handled long-term. And we need to have, I think, the public understand that if the city and county go into it the level that's being proposed here, we're going to be in the tech school business as a part of one of our services from the city. I said when I first came here, and it hasn't changed, I like the idea of the Peaslee Tech Center. I think it's a value, and workforce is clearly an economic development issue, and this is one of the few places probably in the country that's actually addressing workforce to this level. The problem is when we started, we were depending on a federal grant that dissipated. We decided to go ahead anyway. And ever since that point, we've been trying to figure out how do we generate enough funds to make this all happen. So there aren't a whole lot of sources hanging on trees to just pick this off and make this happen. Commitments to proportionally assign equity in the property, improvements in equipment to organizations who provide the funding. By that I mean if the city, county, and the business district got into a thirds relationship, we would have the equity of that relationship. If we ever exited the Peaslee business operation, those funds would come back to the public sources. Understanding and development of the goals for performance and an exit strategy for both short-term and long-term agreements if performance standards aren't met. Actually, I think there needs to be a financial pro forma done on this so that you folks really have an understanding of what this means going forward. I don't really ever see this as a break-even operation, the way it's set up right now. So if you're going to do this, you're going to be committed to an operational commitment for a long time. And city prefers to have the county take the lead in permanent financing and oversight of Peaslee. And I say that in part because, number one, I believe one or the other should be in the lead. And I think one organization providing direct oversight instead of reporting to two masters who occasionally disagree as to direction is not the best way to make sure that this thing stays as a on the line of the performance indicators that we wanted to follow. In terms of economic growth, our commitments there are $220,000 for the Lawrence Chamber, $74,000 for NDC. If we decide to continue that service next year, you know, we just renewed that. $49,000 for downtown Lawrence, $1,060,000 for Explore Lawrence, and we just mentioned that the new Catalyst Industrial Incentive Program is there. I don't think we have any actual operational dollars committed to that in a budget way. It's just that that's part of the new program. In terms of revenues, we have a total assessed value of approaching about $950 million, almost $1 billion. If you look at the breakout of where your revenues are, they're basically taxes, which make up 44%, and then charges for services, which is about 38% of the total. The next slide I want to show you, and if you had a chance to read Chad Lawhorn's section that he writes in the newspaper, he talked about sales tax quite a bit in terms of how it's kind of saving the day for Lawrence. And this chart is pretty dramatic, and it's about sales tax comparison to property tax. So property tax is about 41.4% of our funding, whereas sales tax is approaching almost 50%. And I know some people are sensitive to calling it a vulnerable revenue, but all you have to do is read any articles. In fact, we had an article in your agenda packet not long ago talking about the vulnerability of the retail area in general. And I think while it's clearly capable, computer systems are clearly capable of tracking sales tax for online sales, I think there's some slippage there that may cause us some delays or even missed opportunities in revenue. So that would clearly need to be considered going forward. And it isn't lost on anybody that sales tax is a regressive tax. And so it hits our lowest income population harder than it does others. The tax lid impact, it says here that we don't really understand the full impact at this time. Large portion of the city's general fund expenditures are exempt. Public safety, bond issues, things of that sort. And the city is not recommending an election for the proposed mill increase. So part of the logic behind that is, even though we're proposing a millage increase, we hope that the growth in revenue will be enough to cover that change, so that we don't have to do an election that's contemplated under the tax lid law. I think that's all I had on that. Revenues, we're going to get into a little bit more detail. Sales tax, we're projecting about a 2.2% growth over the 2017 budget. It is interesting to note that it's had steady growth on this chart from 2015 through 18. But it's one of those revenues that I think you really have to monitor throughout the course of the year to make sure you're on track, so that you can be fairly nimble in making adjustments to expenditures if it isn't following the growth expectations that we're plugging in. This is just a bar graph pretty much showing that growth as well, and the breakout of all the different forms of sales tax, use tax that we have. Next is the future sales tax. 2019, at the end of March, our 0.3% infrastructure sales tax, 0.2% transit operation sales tax, and 0.05 transit expansion tax will sunset. The staff is recommending that we have an election in November, so we're going to have to get started on that in terms of making, some decisions about what types of projects you want to delineate for those infrastructure funds. In terms of what these funds generate, the 0.3 infrastructure generates about 5.7 million projected in 18. The 0.2 transit anticipates almost 4 in 2018. And the reallocation of the .05 sales tax to affordable housing anticipates a generation of about $1 million in 2018. The collections, if in fact we go ahead and implement this, the collections would start April 1st of 2019. So you could anticipate then for that 19 budget that we would have these funds available, assuming a successful election. Again, this is a renewal, this is not an additional, and this is a kind of a change in terms of the previous use of transit to affordable housing. The next is kind of a chart that shows just kind of the trends for the school district, Douglas County, and the city of Lawrence in terms of how their mill levy rates are kind of changing across time from 7 to 16. The next is a comparison of mill levy rates. State of Kansas takes about 1% of the mill levy. School district about 41%, Douglas County 34%, and City of Lawrence 24%. And I notice, or I know of Commissioner Boley's concern about this particular chart. Obviously, sales tax is a bigger factor for our jurisdiction than it is the other two jurisdictions, so it wouldn't be fair necessarily to just point at this without noting that difference in our funding streams. The next chart actually shows what the impact of the taxes and fees are on our citizenry. And so what we've done is break that out. And in terms of city property tax, that would go up, and I'm trying to remember, what was the value of the home that we were using?
The
Median value home.
Yes, it was 170.
While she's looking at that, it's gonna go up $47, which is about 7.6%. Solid waste is going up 17, which is 3. Stormwater 2, which is just about 3%. Sewer is $35, which is 7.9. Water is 21, 6.5, for a total increase of about $111. And if you do the math, there's a rounding problem there. It comes probably to 112 versus 111. So it comes out to about 6.7% overall when you throw in all of the taxes and fees over what you currently pay. And what did you get?
We used the median market value of $173,100 for the city of Lawrence.
Okay. So if you can do mental math gymnastics, you can kind of equate your home, if you're a homeowner, and compute what that would look like. The next issue I want to talk about is taxpayer equity, and this is a bit of a sensitive subject. We have a number of agreements, in particular between Douglas County and the city of Lawrence. And just by comparison, let's take Peaslee, for example. If we chose to have the county fund Peaslee 100%, if everybody agreed on that, the taxpayer in Lawrence would pay 74.5% because we make up about 74.5% of the total taxable value that comes from the county. If you decided to split it 50-50 between Douglas County and the city of Lawrence, that would mean that the Lawrence taxpayer would pay 74.5% of the county 50%, and the Lawrence taxpayer would pay 100%, right, of the 50% provided by the city of Lawrence. That equates to 87%. That equates to an increase of 17% for the Lawrence taxpayer versus the Douglas County taxpayer, the city of Baldwin, Eudora, Lecompton taxpayers. So that's the equity issue that I would address. Now, I would also say to you, when you have, for example, the fire medic collaboration that occurred, if you had 2 fire medic operations separate and distinct, one for the county and one for the city, collaboration, okay, even inequitable collaboration would be better than no collaboration, okay? Because then you'll be in a situation where you'll be paying 100% of a more expensive municipal service plus the 74.5% towards the county service. The presumption being that those would be more expensive rather than a collaborated, combined fire medical operation. So my goal is, going forward, is to try and get persons to understand the equity issue in terms of these collaborations and try and make our collaborations more equitable. I think it would be difficult to go back on some of those, but I think if people understand some of the math, it helps them understand where we need to go in terms of the negotiations on some of these things in the future. I've had this conversation with various county representatives, and a bit of the pushback there is, well, you collect all the sales tax, and some of the people in the areas of the county are coming in here and paying sales tax. My counter to that is, and we're providing the services for the commercial property that charges the sales tax, and quite frankly, that's the way the law works in the state. And even though by scale, Baldwin and Eudora and Lecompton don't have the same tax base or sales tax, commercial sales tax base that we do, the law applies to them equally, but they're not coming this direction. So here's the interesting thing. When it cost us 17 plus% more, it actually cost everybody outside of Lawrence 50% less in those collaborations, right? Because 50% of it's being picked up 100% by the Lawrence taxpayer. But again, when we talk about the county, you have to remember that we're almost 75% of the county. So that's the equity issue that I want to point out to you. It's the same equity issue that our friends from Johnson County are pointing out to us about the K-10 connector. They're saying, when you look at origins of who are riding the bus, you're not paying your fair share. And so I said to him, I appreciate that, because I have the same equity when I talk to Johnson County. I have those same equity concerns when I discuss issues with our county. And I said, first off, I want you to know I understand the equity issue and I appreciate what you're doing. I can't just leap to to a full-on equity position at this stage, but maybe what we can do is build towards that over time. And that's what I would say we need to think about with our county as well. Everybody track what I was saying with that? Okay. So these are just, you had some pie charts up there that just talked more about how that distributes out and who pays for what under different scenarios. Next, I want to go to the unfunded requests. Of course, the merit pool reduced to 1%. Previously, was at 3%, so you might claim that that's a 2% underfunding. Longevity reduced by 50% from 48 to 24 per year. I've delayed in this budget a recommendation to delay the citizen survey. That's a $30,000 price tag. The last one we did was in 15. I think that still has relevance, and therefore I would say we maybe can hold off for a year before we jump back into that. And then unfunded capital improvement plan, a number of expenses that would show up under that category. By department, city manager's office, there was a request for a half-time FTE in human resources that we're not funding, a reclassification of the risk managers division, we're not funding. Infotech asked for another full-time equivalent network technician, we're not funding. Police asked for deputy chief, internal audit sergeant, mental health squad, additional mental health squad officer. Requested patrol vehicles over the normal request. Reduced funding for overhires, delay hire for 6 months on the administrative. The request was initially for a full year. I cut it back to a 6-month start time. Fire medical, they asked for a administrative support person, 3 battalion chiefs, 3 firefighters, 1 fire inspector, plan reviewer, lieutenant. Unfunded requests, continuing, fire medical, requested neighborhood smoke alarm campaign, vehicle replacement, reduced general fund capital improvement projects. Overall, we estimated this cost at about $8.7 million. Initially, it had a $60,000 item in there for some IT equipment. We've actually moved that into the equipment reserve fund, so that was not actually a cut. What I'd say to you is that these are all legitimate requests. These aren't just fluff. And when you go through a budget process like that, if I'm doing my job, I'm trying to get to some balance on this budget I present to you. And so I go through it and make those types of cuts. And I'm going to show you those every time we present a budget to you, so you do know that there's a lot of work that goes into this, and there's a lot of agony that goes into making these types of decisions. I don't think anybody's going to squabble that, we could beef up more in terms of public safety. And I know we're short in some of the other areas in our operations as well. But again, if you're going to get back into priorities and funding those priorities, you're going to have to make those same types of cuts. Outside agency requests, the funding is pretty flat. $615,000 comes out of the general fund, $750,000 comes out of the special alcohol fund. Social Service Funding Advisory Board will meet next May 18 and will provide the recommendations on how they wish to allocate those funds. The next slide just shows a breakout of the funding for those intergovernmental agencies, and the next slide shows the breakout for the economic development agencies, and I've talked about those a bit already. Some of the outside agency requests amounted to about $5.3 million. That's the Lawrence Library, Explore Lawrence, Lawrence Arts Center, Douglas County Historical Society, and the Special Olympics of Douglas County. And with that, I'm going to turn it over for Brian to go into some of the accounts. Now, one of the things in response to a comment that I heard from a couple commissioners about the detail, we intend for this to be an online document. And when you get to that place where you want to scroll into more detail, that online document will have it for you. But I contend this document reads for our public a lot clearer than, the 400 and some pages of detail. This gives you kind of the context, the programs, the priorities that we're trying to get to. So I think this is a better public type of document. But I know that there's commissioners that like to get deep into the weeds on this stuff, and that's okay. You're going to have that opportunity by being able to drill down on our online budget document.
Any
Brian?
questions for Tom?
Tom, you bring up the equity issue on some of the various departments that we help fund that are outside of the health department and various things. And the equity issue for a city of Lawrence resident versus a county resident, and the fact that we're both. You're my 4th city manager, and I don't remember a budget year that this wasn't brought up in some fashion.
Really?
Yeah.
That's good.
Tell me how you're going to do it.
Well, I think going forward, I'm going to raise that issue on these arrangements. And in fact, I can tell you, Hugh would, where's Hugh sitting? Hugh would tell you I've already raised that issue on the Peasley. I represent you. You represent the Lawrence taxpayer. That's who we have to make sure is comfortable with that equity issue and how we're doing things. The county has a dual role. They represent all the county taxpayers, and Lawrence happens to be their biggest. So from my standpoint, going forward, we need to make sure that's pointed out. Having said that, there's some collaboration issues that, it may get into a very difficult negotiation, but at the end of the day, it won't be complete equity for us, and we'll still want to do it. because the combination, the collaboration offers more, even with an inequitable distribution of tax base. So that's how I would approach it. I don't know that you can go back, unless there's something that pops that kind of rebalances all of that. But I would tell you that the thing that I guess that concerns me more than just the blanket everybody outside of the city of Lawrence has a 50% cut. I don't understand how you can treat Lawrence different than you can treat the other incorporated communities. Now, I probably will have to drive the speed limit when I go through Lecompton and Baldwin and Eudora, and hopefully I would, but, they're all, as time goes on, they're not, especially, Eudora, that's not gonna be a little, a burg on the highway anymore. That's gonna be a growing entity. And we, the county, I think, needs to consider that and consider how they're evaluated in that mix. I can tell you, since I've been here, that our fire chief has raised this equity issue with me all the way along. And I didn't go there because I'm so impressed that the level of collaboration you have between the city and the county here is beyond many places in this country. And so I didn't want to disrupt that, but equity is an issue, and you need to be comfortable with that. And I'm glad to hear the previous managers brought it up. I didn't need to be tagged with something else.
No,
Uniquely.
I think, the commission, I think this commission has had, some comments about, the health department over the last couple of years. I know when Commissioner Carter at the time, with your predecessor, we had that discussion. Why is, Eudora, the city resident of Eudora, the city resident Baldwin City, Lecompton, why are they not sharing in this contract? And it just kind of seems like it stops. So I just wanted to hear your plan, because it has been talked about in the past. So
My plan includes you, too.
thank you.
My plan includes all of you,
Yeah, thank you.
because I think you have to carry some of that water as well.
I think through collaboration is a very significant financial opportunity for both the county and the city. And as we are, pursue those opportunities, it's good to be in touch with what you've pointed out, because we need to come up with good collaborations. So thanks.
Tom, on your unfunded department requests, I just had a question on the deputy chief of police. I know up to this point that's not been something that we have had, but I think that that's been noted by members of the department, specifically the chief. And I wonder, as we begin a search for a new chief, is the absence of a deputy chief going forward going to hinder our ability to get top-notch candidates?
No, I don't think so at all. First off, I'm very complimentary of the organizational structure of the police department as it is now. And I'll say that because it's flat. It's a flatter type organization. It isn't vertical, it's horizontal. And they do a very effective job. And they do their job day in and day out without a deputy chief. Now, does that stress certain administrators? Yes, it does, of the police department. I'm sure it does. But I would put people on the street before I'd create that position. That's the point of citizen contact. That's the point of community involvement. And that's, quite frankly, what I want to see from police. So I don't want more verticality. Police are the original contact decision maker. They are not, more so than fire, because usually fire responds as a team. Police often respond as an individual. They're making split-second discretionary decisions all the time. And so having those people on the street, I think it makes more sense, and having it more horizontal makes more sense. Just because you don't have a deputy chief doesn't mean you can't get the same things done. Police work is all about that contact, in my opinion.
I did have at least one, well, several, but I noticed that in the water and wastewater fund, that you're showing an increase of 8%, projected increase of 8% on the expenditures, whereas many of the other funds usually were about 1, 2, 3, 4%. Why is there such a big difference in that?
Well, we can get into that now, or we can
Well,
let
okay, we can
Dave
wait for
address
Brian.
that when Dave comes forward.
Yeah, that's
Is that
fine.
okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. If there's no more questions, kick it over to Brian.
Thank you. This section was basically getting now into the actual departmental presentations, but overall, I wanted to address some of the bigger picture items. You'll see in the book that what we've done is given you for all of the funds, for all the budgeted funds, the 2016 actual, the 2017 original budget, 2017 revised budget, and then the 2018 request. In addition, for those what I call major funds, the really larger funds that we have, we actually show you a graphical representation of the financial forecast from 2017 to 2022. We do a financial forecast for all of our funds, but in actuality, it would just be pretty repetitious because a lot of them are just very, either smaller, whatever. But we can provide those if you want, but we really did focus for this document just on those major financial funds that you see. I also want to remind the governing body that property taxes are in 3 of our funds: the general operating fund, the library fund, and then the debt service fund, or the bond and interest fund. And then up above there in the presentation shows again the same mill levy graph that you've seen before. In 2017, we're looking at, and when I say 2017 tax year is what funds our 2018 budget. So I need to make sure you understand on this column here, is all the 3 levies or 2 of the levies are the same. However, the debt service, you'll see, has that 1 1/4 levy increase that the city manager presented earlier. And this next slide is just, again, it's very difficult, obviously, to see online here, but it's in your book. Hopefully, it's blown up well enough in the book that shows the 4 columns.
Page 42.
Thank you. And with that also is the financial forecast portion of it. The financial forecast for the general fund, if you recall, the city manager just made the comment about 25%. We're looking at being at 25% fund balance of expenditures at the end of 2018. There is a slight decrease in fund balance over the next 5 years. But I guess my comments on that are there's just so much unknown over the next couple of years that we're not overly concerned with keeping it between 22 and 25%. Policy, internal policy that we've adopted and that we're looking at, and you'll see recommendations in budgets going forward. If we were to exceed that 25%, as we did actually at the end of 2000, and we're planning to at the end of 2017, is to transfer any surplus into capital or equipment reserve funds. And so as we're going into our budgeting in 2018, you may have noticed there's one comment that city manager made about IT had an item for $60,000, but then we actually put it out over into the equipment reserve fund. The reason we were able to do that is because there was a surplus at the end of, estimated at 2017, that would have brought us over 25% fund balance. And so what we've done is taken the transfer and put it over into these reserve funds in order to fund equipment and capital, which is, again, one of our policies. So what we're hoping to do is we budget conservatively. You'll see the revenues are fairly conservative, or I hope they're conservative. The expenditures, we always want to make sure that we have the authority if needed, but the expenditures at the department level are as of full service of that department for that year. So if there's any kind of things, if they have savings or whatever, they won't get up to that expense level, and we'd be able to move that then over to reserve fund. So that's why I'm not overly concerned about having that fund balance percent drop below 25%. Bond and interest fund, again, is the other major debt service, or major property tax fund. And then you'll also see the fund balance in this fund,
Page 58.
sorry, I don't have page numbers on mine. What this graph is basically representing, again, it's our 5-year forecast. You'll see between 2017 and 2018, the blue line, the blue graph, that's the property tax increase of 1.25%. And then you see the expenditure, which is that red bar, actually exceeding revenue over several years. That the debt service fund has built up a fund balance over the last several years. And so what this is contemplating is over the next 5 years, actually paying down that fund balance. And the attempt is to come in basically like a soft landing on our fund balances. What you don't see here is the 2023 is that the forecast is actually leveling out our fund balance and keeping that around that 15% level of fund balance. That's what's allowing us to do have a $17 million bond issue in 2018 for the first phase of a police station. So I did want to point that out. You'll see the expenditures over revenue over the 5 years, but you also see we had at some point quite a bit of fund balance in the debt service fund, and so that's what's taken that down. And then the library fund. The library fund is staying steady. One interesting, since I'm a numbers person, I find it interesting. The projected 2017 amount of expenditures is $4,131,000, as well as their 2018 request of $4,131,000. The reason that they're the same amount is in the past, the city used to hold on to a certain amount of fund balance and then use that for the next tax year funding. So the city always had some level of fund balance in the public library fund, just kind of carrying there in case there's any year that the valuations didn't come in high enough. What we're doing in 2017 is paying out all funds on hand that the city has that were raised the property tax for the library. And so as it turns out, we're paying an additional $148,000 that represents some fund balance that was held at the city. And so as it turns out, the 17 and 18 requests actually will turn out to be the actual same amount. But again, it's just the way that the numbers worked out on that. And then you'll see on that graph. Yep.
Okay, so a year ago, on the last note of the budget, the library came front and center, right? And we had the discussion about, we were required to increase their budget at that time because of some opinion, some law opinion. So we're saying that opinion still stands, and whatever they bring forward has to be funded, correct? They, the library board, is that right?
Yes, up to the limit that is set by a charter ordinance that the city has in place.
Okay, so we get to stay at the 4.5 mils, and that's all, right?
Correct, and it's 4 mils up to a limit of 4 mils, and then half a mil for employee benefit type expenditures in there. So right now they are. Help me. What's they're close. They're right.
4.039.
Yes, 4.039 is the current mill levy. We're assuming that .039 portion is more than covered by their employee benefit expenditures in the library. That's why they're able to go over the 4. But If they come forward in a future time and ask for something that brings them up to 4.5, that's where you're, in the opinion that we have, that's where the charter ordinance then takes place and limits them at the mill levy portion. And also, it's also outside of the tax lid calculations also, by statute.
Yeah, there's a provision in the statute that basically says where there's entities, agencies that get their tax levy from a governing body like you, and you don't have any discretion in making that decision, those are exempt. It's kind of an interesting phraseology, and you'd have to understand the state politics about how that got there as to what their intention was. I don't know if it was specifically for the libraries or who it was for, but that language is in there and it seems to read that way. That doesn't mean, and Brad Allen and I had conversations about this, that doesn't mean that you don't have other options in terms of, charter ordinance types of changes that you could make. And I would guess at this point that kind of keeps the governor on how the library board and the library administration looks at their budgets. They're not a runaway. They can't be. There's still a level of, jeopardy that they could experience by irritating the city commission to a point where the commission decides to make changes. And I think you kind of see that in what the recommendation they made was, right? Because they came back with a neutral rate, same tax rate as the prior year. So I think they understand, that it isn't just a slam dunk every time whatever they ask for, and that there are consequences that if they push it too far, there's potential pushback from the commission. Now, on the other hand, persons that have those kinds of complaints, refer them directly to the library board and the library administration. That's their bailiwick.
Got it.
I think before we get into the department budgets, I want to again express that the CIP, the 2018 to 2022 CIP that was presented to you several weeks ago, basically we took the 2018 funded portions and put them in the 2018 operational budget. And so you'll see in many cases as departments are talking about their budgets, that it will have something that was that was identified in the 2018 CIP. We're still working on some of the adjustments, but the adjustments that we'll be bringing back to you at the June 13th meeting, we'll have a detailed list of anything that's been adjusted from when we presented the CIP to you a couple weeks ago to what will be presented at the June meeting. Again, as a reminder, these are items that are identified as costing over $100,000 with a life over 2 years. There was, over the 5-year CIP, it's $278 million worth of improvements. And all of the financial forecasts are balanced with that $278 million worth of CIP projects. And so now as we get in the department presentation, if you don't mind, I'm going to go off script a little bit. If you can go to OpenGov. City manager made a comment about being able to get down more into or get into more detail. Again, the book, when it's in its final form, will have the ability for you to go in and actually get down more into details. The mechanism we're using is something called OpenGov. And what you have up here is just, it's real-time data, basically as departments, and it's been reviewed. Here are the revenues and expenditures that's represented in the complete $199 million budget. Again, when we publish it, a citizen will be able to then to go back and actually get in and get down, I think pretty much down to the line item level, or at least down to the object level. So they're really, again, it's as much transparency as I think anyone could probably I know I will spend a lot of time, evenings and weekends looking at this, and I'm sure there'll be people doing that also, but it's interesting. The website here, you can actually go to all the other cities that use this, and sure enough, I found myself going to all these other cities and, oh, that's interesting. But Daniel, if you just go to expenditures, yep, 199 million. There's the 199 million. If you could show kind of a chart underneath. Okay, so I'm having her show this for a very specific reason. The totals, basically what you're seeing in the book are directly out of this OpenGov in these charts. The charts are sometimes a little difficult to read in that the totals are rolling up from the bottom. So if you're looking into a book, and I'm sorry to take a little extra time to do that, but we have had some questions. So like if I could take Parks and Recreation is a great example since they have a lot of departments. That's on page 101 of your book. And I guess you could go there. But if you look at the grand total of Parks and Recreation, it's $13,558,000. But then it does some subtotaling within the table itself. Yeah, it's kind of hard to do right on the fly, so sorry about that. Yeah, she does. Parks. Yeah. Parks by fund. And so then if she goes down to the table down there. So at the very bottom, if you scroll down to the bottom of the expenses, you'll see that $13,558,000. But the way it prints, it doesn't indent these these additional funds. And so it all lines up. So if the very top, the general fund is 5.4 million, and then it gives a subtotal of what the following special revenue funds are going to be, which is 7 million. But then it gives you another subtotal of special revenues called 7 million. So it can be a little confusing, but when you get the concept, it's rolling up the subtotals. Hopefully it's not too confusing. When it's online, it's very intuitive that you can go straight to each of the funds and see the totals. But in this book form, there's been a couple questions by department heads actually about how to make sure that they're looking at the right numbers. So I just wanted to point that out, and I probably geeked out a little bit on this aspect more than I should. And with that, I guess we'll just turn it over to the department head presentations.
Appreciate you showing us.
Thank you.
So I'll take the first one. It's the city commission and the city auditor. We've zeroed out the city commission this year. So you're on your own. There isn't a significant change really in this one. What I did add was about $500 to attend local events.
92.
92. For commissioners to attend local events, I note that many of you are not national conference attendees on many things. So I think it's reasonable to expect the city to at least pay for your participation in some of the local events that are held beyond those that we generally would attend. Some of the CIP projects that are attributed to the city commission include affordable housing initiatives and the animal shelter construction partnership, so you'll see those identified under yours. And then, as I indicated earlier, we'll have a discussion about the city auditor position later on in the budget process. And that's all I really had. And apparently you're not charging any fees, so. Unless you think there's some you could charge.
One thing I do miss from the layout of last year is that each department kind of had like a blue paragraph that explained the changes from year to year. I don't know if you remember that off the top of your head. But at the bottom, because the raw numbers are good, but it's also good to have more of a general kind of explanation of what the changes were, hope that makes sense.
We're okay with that.
Yeah.
All right, so next we wanted to kind of roll up several departments, several of the smaller departments into one presentation because there's not a lot of CIP projects or unfunded requests or personnel changes to note. So I'm going to go through the city manager's office, and there is one kind of caveat with the city manager's office. We did take out transit. They are going to present their budget kind of as a separate piece of that pie because there's some notable changes that Bob's here to kind of talk about and walk through. So the rest of the city manager's budget is relayed in this, as well as the city attorney's office, finance, IT, and then the tourism department. So in all of those departments, there are about 3 CIP projects. The first are some adequate security measures, and this is again for the municipal court building. IT is also has about $100,000 in the CIP annually for fiber projects, and in the next 2 years, they also have some funding for some access layer switches. In terms of unfunded requests, there were 3 of them. So there was a network technician position requested from IT. There was also a half-time human resource specialist. So currently we have a half-time. The request was to make that half-time FTE position a full-time position. And then finally, as Tom mentioned earlier, there was a request for a reclassification in the risk manager's division of the city manager's office. In terms of personnel changes, again, there's a part-time security guard position in the city attorney's office for the municipal court. And there's also the elimination of 1 vacant communication manager position in the city manager's office. And none of these departments had any fee changes of note. So to kind of help break this out a little further, I'm going to go through each department's graph in a little more detail to help kind of explain some of the changes that have happened from the 17 revised budget to 18. So in the city manager's office, you'll note a pretty significant increase in contractual services. This is due primarily to the economic development expenditures that we have. So in the past, we have actually budgeted for those in the finance department, but we took those out of finance because economic development is kind of a division of the city manager's office, and have moved those into contractual services within the city manager's office. So these are some of the charges like the NDC council that we have, BTBC funding, Peasley. Some of those funding is actually going to be paid for in 18 out of the city manager's office. There's also a slight increase in personnel services, and again, most of this is for kind of regular salaries. And then, as Tom noted, healthcare is also a large expense, and you'll see that throughout all of the departments as we go through. And I should note as well, 17 was the first year that healthcare was budgeted in department budgets. So again, if you see a large increase from 16 to 17 in that personal services line item, a lot of that is healthcare and changing how we actually allocate those funds. So the next department is the city attorney's office. And this, you'll note, personal services is increasing. And this is due to that part-time court security officer primarily, along with those healthcare expenditures. Contractual services is decreasing, commodities is staying about the same, and again, you can see the yellow at the very bottom, the capital outlay is the adequate security measures that are in our CIP. Finance is going down significantly throughout the years, and this is largely attributed to various items that we traditionally have budgeted in the finance department that we've tried to better allocate to the actual department responsible for those items. So from 17 to 18, that big expenditure, like I said previously, was the economic development allocation in that contractual services area. You'll also note, and I guess I should also note in contractual services that we're also moving dispatch to police and fire, again, to better allocate the department that's actually using those services. Debt service, you can also see, is changing from 17 to 18, and that's because we're planning on issuing more debt in 18. And then I also wanted to note the transfers, which is the green, and you can see that has gone down significantly from 15 to 18. And in the past, we've actually put money into the general fund that we've received from sales tax and things of that nature, and then transferred them into the appropriate funds. Now we're trying to directly transfer those into the appropriate funds instead of having it pass through the general fund first and through the finance department. So that's why you're seeing that green bar go down kind of consistently year after year, because we're directly putting that revenue and that funding into the appropriate fund. All right, next is IT. And this budget, although it doesn't necessarily look like it has remained relatively flat. This is one of the smaller budgets, so it's a little exaggerated on this chart. But the personal services has increased slightly. Again, this is mostly in regular salaries and for healthcare. You will notice the biggest increase is in capital outlay, and that again is for those access layer switches and the fiber projects that they have budgeted in the CIP. Finally, the tourism division. This is largely the contractual services. That piece of the pie is largely attributed to Explore Lawrence. That makes up about $1,060,000. In that line item, we also have some dollars allocated for like sister cities, walk-ins, and then some special programming. So Tom kind of discussed some of that when he went through some of those outside agency requests. So some of those dollars are actually coming from the tourism fund. And the rest of it is maintaining relatively flat, and there are 3 FTEs that are also paid out of this fund. So that's kind of all wrapped up into this chart. All right, so now I will pass it to Bob, and he can talk about transit, the one kind of piece of the city manager's office that wasn't discussed previously.
First, the significant changes that we're going to experience in this budget is changes to the MD contract. Every year there's an increase of 2 to 3% in the actual contract. So that is reflected in this budget. The increase in service that we experienced here over the last year was actually in last year's budget in 2017. So this year there's not much of that that's
What
going to be
page
noticed.
are we on?
It's part of the city manager 193.
And after this, it goes in much better order. So I do apologize. We tried to condense it down just to keep it moving.
Under CIP projects, there are 2 of mention, and one of them is the multimodal. There's $500,000 in the CIP project for A&E architectural and engineering work for a potential multimodal center, and there's $150,000 in there for passenger amenities, shelters, benches, those things. The unfunded request that's in this is, as Tom has mentioned, the K-10 connector service at $120,000. There are no personnel changes in this, and there is actually no fee changes.
Just to clarify, the K2 connector is flat. So it is funded. It's not completely unfunded. What's unfunded is just the
Yeah, it was the
increase.
70,000 difference,
Sorry,
right.
I just
Okay.
wanted to clarify.
Yeah, that's true. Fee changes, there's actually no fee changes, but one of the things that we are doing this year is we are offering up a student pass program for 4 months this year for the summer. And that's a pilot project. We're going to try it this summer. We're expecting it to be successful. If it is successful, we want to roll that out in 2 other 4-month increments, one in the fall semester for students and then one in the spring semesters for students. So for $10, they could ride for 4 months. So
Is that university students, or are we talking
K through 12.
K through 12?
Yes, just
Okay.
K through 12. Yeah, university students are already paying
Yeah,
for their
that's what I was
service, so, yeah. And then the graph, which kind of represents the transfers for sure in 2016, it shows what was going on there. That's it.
Good afternoon, Amy Miller, Assistant Director of Planning. I'll be pinch hitting for Scott this afternoon, who's away at a conference. In terms of the budget, we do have the one-stop shop tenant finish programmed into the CIP for 2018. We don't have any unfunded requests. We do have 2 personnel changes. One is to eliminate a vacant code enforcement officer position that was originally dedicated for the rental registration program. It is unfilled. We haven't had a need to fill it. And to reclassify a vacant planner 2 position to a planner 1. We don't have any fee changes this year. Last year, we did come through and we did do a comprehensive fee analysis department-wide, and we did increase quite a bit of our fees. We expect to be doing that on a 2-year basis. So we expect to do that analysis again next year to see if we need to adjust any of our fees. And overall, including the general fund and the grant funds, we have about a $4.3 million budget. The grant funds, or the general fund, makes up about $3 million of that. And between CDBG, home, and our transportation grants, we're looking at about $1.3, $1.4 million. The CDBG and the home grants do make up about $1.1 million of our $4.3 million budget.
Well, note that CDBG grant and the home grant, since that's a federal programs, right? So how are we, with the feds, Trump's budget indicating they wanted to remove all that, how's that going to impact us?
We have not heard any more information on that. They are typically awarded every year on a certain date. We are actually waiting to hear right now for the 2017 year, which starts August 1st of 2017. So it would be some time before we hear about the proposed 2018.
I suspect there'll be quite a debate on that. Congress usually doesn't just accede to a request from the president at that level. And there's a lot of legislators who probably would take offense to those types of cuts in the cities.
So we aren't spending money yet that we haven't gotten, is that right?
No, we use, the allocations are very clear to us, and that's what we use.
I think we've talked a little bit about police in some of the first presentations, but there you have a list of the CIP projects, police facility phase 1, it's estimated at $17 million. A reminder that right now in 2017, one of the things this commission approved last year was $1.5 million for design and master planning, so that money is sitting there largely unspent. So this would be a add-on to that in terms of if you put this together with the money you already have for planning, you should be able to master plan and move forward, come up with a multi-year scenario. We just have to settle on a site, and I know you guys are still having that discussion. Police radios, that's something that over 3 or 4 years we're going to have to upgrade the radios. Motorola is no longer servicing. We have kind of the monopoly on the issue with the radios to maintain our state interoperability with all the state systems. Motorola is the vendor that we have to use. If not, we're kind of on our own. So it's important to be able to, as an officer travels back and forth on a highway, or we get in a pursuit or go somewhere else, or if we have to respond in terms of a weather event or another place, or have other people come in our community from other jurisdictions, that we're all interoperable. Firearm simulator is more of a decision-making type tool. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to have more scenario-based training, decision-making on when to use force or not. And a firearms simulator is a series of computers, screens, and related equipment that you can set up in a room that you can make scenarios and have decision-making. Body-worn cameras we've talked a little bit about. I think we reviewed the unfunded requests. Some personnel changes, again, it would be the tech support for the body-worn cameras. If we're talking about 150 some cameras, you're looking at maybe 3 hours a day of high-definition video per officer. You're 50,000 hours of high-definition video per year, needing somebody to manage that, manage the servers, disseminate all that, things that come along with that. Just some budget cleanup as far as moving the mental health responder from the general fund to the special alcohol fund, and no fee changes. Most of what you see there is just personnel services, contractual services, and commodities increases, and that's reflected in our budget. And some of the again, things you're seeing in the other budgets of other departments is making sure that the right things belong in the particular department's budgeting process. So you're seeing the increase there. Personnel benefits continue to cost more for the same amount. So that's just one of the challenges we have, as any other department would have.
Mayor, Commission?
Interrupt a
Sorry.
second. This,
Yeah.
you can go ahead and go to the fire department.
Okay.
Those kind of summary slides, I guess, is what I'm missing that we were talking about. Are those summary slides in here anywhere?
They aren't, but we
Okay.
can certainly keep it in there for the adopted.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Mayor and Commission, my name is Sean Coffey, and I'm filling in for Mark Bradford today. And before we get started, I think the chief would be quite disappointed in me if I didn't offer to help you review the police department's budget for funding for the fire department. So we'll get started here. Wanted to look at our CIP projects. I'm the division chief of training, so I'm quite excited about our new burn tower. Our original tower was constructed in 1993. So this is a new tower that we're looking at. It's going to give us an opportunity to do many more evolutions, put into practice some of our new types of construction here in town. The apparatus bay exhaust system, one of the biggest initiatives for the fire service is cancer prevention. Overall, nationally, firefighters have a higher incidence of all forms of cancer. And so anything we can do to remove the carcinogens from the exhaust systems will make it better for our firefighters. The Quint replacement is part of our apparatus replacement program. And this has been an ongoing program where we get a new apparatus, we keep it in service, and then we put it into reserve status for 3 years and use it when other trucks are down, and then we put them out. And you remember in the past we used to keep apparatus so long that they actually had no value when we finally took them out of service, and they're becoming huge maintenance issues. Just a little bit on the unfunded request. We're requesting to fill an administrative support position that was removed in 2017. Currently, we have 2 full-time positions that take care of 6 divisions and about 169 personnel, so they're quite busy. We added in 3 battalion chief positions, and just to give you some perspective on it, when I started way back in 1985 and I weighed less and had more color in my hair, we had 5 companies in the department with 18 personnel, and we responded to about 1,200 calls. In 2016, we have 12 companies, 39 personnel, and we do 12,000 calls. That additional battalion chief position is a command level position that would support when our current chiefs are running. We run the entire county. So when we run a large multi-vehicle accident out in the county, we have a fire within the city, that person is in charge of that, commanding that. And what we're finding more and more, that person's tied up to that and is not able to administer the system. So we feel it's becoming a more critical issue all the time. 3 additional firefighter positions. This are people who are going to be assigned 1 person per shift to our rescue company. Technical rescue was one of the priorities listed in our strategic plan by the public that they wanted us to get into. When I talk about technical rescue, I talk about trench rescue, confined space, rope rescue, building collapse, and those kind of things. And that was to get that 4th person on there so we're able to work as efficiently and safely as possible. The inspector plan reviewer position, that was an increase. One of the things that we're seeing with the increase in development within the city is that we have a goal within planning and development that we get those plans reviewed within 15 days of being presented. That time frame now is getting longer and longer due to the workload. And so as we look to the future, that'll be something we talk about. And then a big one for us, obviously, being the fire department, is the neighborhood smoke alarm program. We looked at that. As you recently know, we've had a fatality related to a fire where there was a non-working smoke detector. So we really believe it's an important program. Vehicle replacement was for a staff vehicle that we're able to get another year out of that vehicle and go get it through. As far as personnel changes, there weren't any for 2018. For big fee changes, county pays 100% of the Eudora EMS. Many of you know we added 8 positions, and we now have an ambulance in Eudora staffed with 2 people, and now it's able to cover that northeast part of the county. It's really helped with our responses, and also that medic unit can come into the city as the city gets busy, provide additional support as well.
Does Baldwin have their own, or does,
Baldwin has, well, they have an ambulance there. It's not a Baldwin ambulance, and it's not a Eudora ambulance. It's a Southern Douglas County ambulance, and then it's a, well, I'd call it, should say, Southeast ambulance in Eudora. We want everybody to know they are located in those facilities, but they leave those to respond to calls anywhere within the county. So it's a true resource for fire and medical, for EMS response.
So does the city of Aurora provide any funding for the EMS?
The county pays
All of it
for
is the
those,
county.
100% of those 8 positions.
Baldwin City,
Yes.
and Baldwin City does not pay
No, but-
any towards the.
Yes, they don't pay anything. Eudora City doesn't either. The county provides the funding for that.
Is that typical? Because Lawrence pays into that, obviously, the city.
I think the original agreement for the Baldwin was part of the merger agreement, and that goes back quite a ways back to 1997 and how that was set up. But it's a little unique that it's a county, we are a county-based EMS service within the fire and medical department. And so them providing those 8 positions, they're able to respond out in that part of the county, and we're able to deliver a higher, quicker level of ALS care than previously. But then also, to be honest, we're able to, since we're countywide and the city is the county, we're able to come in and provide ALS service within the city if we start running out of medic units within the city.
Does this seem to bode back to that equity issue, Tom? Okay.
Yeah. I'm sure Sean could fill in for Mark, but he should wait for Mark to give you that.
Yeah, please, yeah. I'll second that.
No pun intended, but he probably has a lot more fire about that issue.
Good afternoon. The city manager mentioned about $6 million, over $6 million for street maintenance. That's great funding for our annual street maintenance program. Tonight, you'll receive the contract for our mill and overlay program. While this is significant funding, just need to mention that we still have about 19% of our streets that are in poor condition, which is about 165 lane miles. Earlier this year, the commission received a report from our pavement engineer that the overall PCI has decreased a little bit and we're losing ground on our deterioration rate. The only reason I'm mentioning this, again, we are glad to see the street maintenance funding, but that infrastructure sales tax is important. And we need to get on that, and I know the city manager mentioned that we're going to proceed to getting it on the November election, but it's really important for us to maintain that infrastructure, that funding. The 2018 CIP includes another $450,000 for sidewalks, bike lanes, and ADA ramps or ADA access. And earlier this spring, we also discussed how about maintenance for sidewalks. We did not come to a decision on that program. The Pedestrian Bike Task Force made several project-specific recommendations for the $450,000. The city has significant sidewalk and accessible ramp repair needs as well. Over $3 million in ADA access ramps alone. Maybe before we start building new infrastructure, we might want to think about using some of those funds to repair and maintain the infrastructure that we currently have to maintain. 19th Street on the consent agenda tonight is 19th and Naismith. I'm kind of going out of order, and I don't have all these on here, but I'll throw them out anyway. 19th Street's on the consent agenda. We got a great bid. We want to get started next Monday. The next section, which is at the actual road between Naismith and Osdale to Iowa, the road sections, will be in the 18 budget. Queens Road, that's partially a chip seal, mostly gravel, but it's designated a minor arterial. We're going to set a public hearing date in June for a benefit district. The city will also have $350,000 participation in that for additional pavement width for bike lanes and the additional width from between a sidewalk width and a multi-use path. By our development code, the city at large picks up those costs. The rest of it will be done through a benefit district. The Bowersock Dam, at the south end of the dam, we have a big scour hole. It's undermining the dam on the downstream face that needs to be repaired. There's $1 million in the CIP for that. East 9th Street, as the city manager presented, East 9th Street has a $2.5 million budget in the CIP. That's for the typical street that the commission looked at to include bike lanes and some pedestrian scale lighting. But that's what that covers, and then hopefully we can work with the Our Place grant to include some other aesthetics as well. The CIP includes replacement of several pieces of equipment that we need to get replaced. It also includes 2 automated side load solid waste trucks. The FCIP program is making a lot of needed progress. We're seeing a lot of progress here in City Hall with new windows, addressing facility maintenance needs and energy needs. The 2018 budget has $400,000 to do the Art Center roof and $120,000 for the fire alarm panel here in City Hall. And we're making significant progress in flooding, stop flooding in the city. In 2016, the 5th and Maple Street project was completed. In the next couple weeks, just after school gets out, 23rd and Osdale, we're going to put in a 78-inch storm sewer line that's going to take care of the flooding at that intersection that we've had for years. And in the 2018 budget, there's $250,000 to begin our storm sewer lining program.
Is that for a specific area or just?
We need to still get some of our evaluations done. We haven't picked any specific ones at this time. For the lining program you're talking?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah,
So what kind of lining is that? I mean, what is that?
it's probably going to be similar to something like the utilities department does with in situ form, or a cured in place pipe.
Oh, I see. To deal with cracks and stuff in the existing pipes?
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
Personnel changes. As we continue to automate, there's less need for that labor-intensive, that physical labor. And in 2018, with the automated side loads that we're getting, we're anticipating being able to eliminate 2 of the loader positions in our solid waste department. Unfunded requests. The direction was no increase for the 2018 budget, so we did not submit any new requests. We focused specifically on maintaining the existing infrastructure and facilities, and that was our priority. Fee increases. We're going to have some more discussions on this, but we'll kind of wet your whistle with some of this. Currently, our right-of-way permit fees are $10. We spend a lot of staff time getting together with event organizers, parade organizers, even just contractors that are working in the right-of-way. We're going to present probably a $50 permit fee. We had over 400 right-of-way permits that were issued. We had over 120 street events that we worked on, and the street events take a lot of work. So we're going to probably propose that back to the commission. The projected revenue increase is probably about $15,000. Meter bags, we charge $1 per bag, and we don't have a duration. Meter bags reserve a parking space and allow no parking except for the intended user. Businesses lose potential patrons. The $1 that we charge doesn't even pay for the meter fees. We intend to come back probably with a substantially higher fee, maybe even up to $20 per bag per day. It's a big inconvenience for the downtown businesses. It takes up those parking spots, and like I said, it doesn't even pay for basically the meter fee. And currently, we don't even charge for no parking signs. We make the no parking signs. We give them to people who come in for these events. They put them out, but there's staff time there. We think we should at least be recouping those. Stormwater and solid waste fees, we're proposing a 3% increase. On solid waste, that's about 55 cents per month for a residential user. On stormwater fees, that's 12 cents per ERU, which is about 1,500 square feet per month.
I can tell you, check the right-of-way fees, it's still pretty reasonable. City of Wichita charges $75 for a right-of-way permit. That's
Yes.
for each hole that you want to put in a right-of-way.
Well, we've got a whole right-of-way ordinance that we need to bring back to the commission with a lot of other, these were just things to touch on, but
Okay.
there's a lot more to it. On these graphs, probably the biggest swing, I mean, it looks pretty erratic. The biggest swing is the capital outlay. In the 17 budget, we had some huge projects with Castle, 19th Street, and Wakarusa all combined. And in the 18 budget, there's a couple of CIP projects, but the biggest difference is in the capital outlay. Contractual services, the increase for solid waste fees really leans towards a lot because we've got a contract with Hams, our landfill person. It's 3.5%. It's going to go up next year. And our recycling tipping fee is 3% increase next year. Like everybody else said, obviously we have personnel adjustments as far as wages and health care. Unless there's any other questions? Yes?
The increase in solid waste is about $1 million between 17 and 18. But the 2016 actual and the working budget for 2018, we're up about $3.4 million.
The 2016 actual and the what?
And the working budget for 2018, it's up about $3.4 million.
Okay.
Can you find out some information on that, on why that's gotten that
We can.
that large, and why that big spread?
Sure. Unless, do you know exactly?
I think a little bit of it.
It's $3.5 million, maybe more than a little.
I don't want to speak too extemporaneously on this, but a little bit of it has to do with the, with that fund balance forward that gets rolled into part of the expenditures, I think. And in 2017, you've got the Kresge building there for $2.7 million, but I think you were saying 2016 to 2018.
Yeah, I just noticed that the difference between, in 2016, the actual budget was 10.1, and the working budget for 18 is 13.5, so there's 3.4. I mean, I can
Right.
look for information.
Right, and we will bring back information on that, just
Right.
to
Well,
be
the
super
only reason
detailed.
I bring it up is we talk about the sustainability of being able to do
Absolutely.
the things that we're doing right now. And if we can't do it now, we've seen these kind of increases, I'd just like to have some information.
Just to check back, like, if you look at the 2015 budget, that, you see a big decrease there too, and a lot of that was positions we didn't fill or equipment we didn't buy. That, and I know right off the top of my head, in 2018, our capital outlay has increased significantly to get at that automation component. That's a little bit. We'll bring back more information.
Okay.
Yeah, the 15 actual is 12.3, so that's what Tim's pointing out.
went Yeah. from
12.3 down to 10.1 and then back up.
Good afternoon. Mark Eckler, Parks and Recreation Department. Just a quick overview. We basically operate out of 5 different funds for Parks and Recreation. It's about a $13 million total budget. The biggest, or probably the most prominent, is the general fund budget. General fund pays for basically park maintenance, cemetery maintenance, facility maintenance, horticulture, forestry, and then also athletic complex maintenance. So in that, the first couple of items, there are significant changes. We're taking on the Santa Fe Depot. Chuck said he wanted it. I said, no, it needs to come with us because we do historic structures. And he,
I think you said, I don't want it.
oh, no.
I don't want it.
Oh, okay, yeah. I couldn't remember, something like that. But it's going to be ours, and it's going to be wonderful.
Draw straws.
Yeah, the next thing is the Emerald Ash Borer. That's a continuing program. That's something that the commission approved in the middle of last year, so we've operated about 6 months of that or 7 months of that. Just to give you some ballpark numbers so you can know how it's going. Basically, in 2016, we removed 212 dead ash trees, and we planted 190 new trees. So we're about 1-to-1 at about a 200 pace. This year, we're projecting 300 removals and 300 plants. Next year, we're looking at 500 removals and 400 plants. So that's what we're budgeting here. We're going at a slower pace than we originally proposed when we came to you, just because it's honestly, it's a whole bunch of work doing all those removals and plantings. And I think we'll probably spread this out over probably 12 years as opposed to 8. So we're increasing that by $94,000 next year is what the proposal is. The Santa Fe Depot is a $30,000 increase. So those are the two significant changes listed up there. CIP projects, Downtown Master Plan was one we submitted. I think it's going to be more of a citywide work effort with planning and the city manager's office. Also downtown, we're working on the brick replacement. We're going to continue that process. We have it planned for 3 years. We're in the second year of a three-year project. YSC concessions restroom, something that's been on the list for a long time, trying to bring those facilities up to par out there. But we also have a couple of other CIP items. We're going to paint the indoor pool. We have Holcomb Ball Diamond parking lots going to be replaced. Community building's going to get some renovation. South Park Playground's going to get some renovation. So all these CIP items are actually just going to be amazing. You saw in there that we deferred $350,000 worth from this year. Basically what we did is move projects to next year. So the East Lawrence Center renovation and the replacement of one of the bucket trucks got moved to 2019. So we haven't really taken them off the list. If you look at the unfunded list on CIP, there are a whole bunch of Parks and Rec projects there that are unfunded going through the whole CIP. We'll continue to just evaluate and push those up as we can. I think there's 21 of them. And then there's a couple the public have proposed to, like the Park Hill Playgrounds that's on the unfunded list. But I think there's ways to get at a number of those things through other funding sources that we may be able to do a little bit at a time as opposed to one big project. So that's right. The general fund, the recreation funds, a fee and sales tax supported funds. So basically it's a 60% fee supported and 40% tax supported. We try to, that last item where it says fee changes, we look at fees every year, all year, and try to basically push our fees to the limit to where we think it's basically where people will pay. So what service are we offering and what will people pay for it? We want to look at profitability of those, not really profitability, but just basically cost recovery. So in that fund, we're really pushing health and wellness this year in programming. That's something, looking at the strategic plan and saying what can we do, where could we be putting these things. So we want to look at that. We want to look at special event programming with something that was identified in our master plan as not well programmed. So we want to push those up the ladder a little bit. That again, turning this over to creative staff is kind of fun. Just say, hey, what could we do if we thought about a new special event? So that's recreation fund. Golf fund's basically a 1-to-1, so we always propose high revenue, high sales, so we're projecting the best year ever every year. We don't know if it'll happen, but if it does happen, we want to be funded to do it. So we really, so far this year, we've seen a nice uptick in the number of golfers, and we're fairly optimistic about where we're headed with that. So the other funds, the 216 budget is a special recreation fund, is funded by alcohol tax. It supports some of the recreation programs, and the other one is the downtown budget, which is guest tax funded. So that supports all the downtown landscaping beautification. That's basically our budget. It's about $13 million total. No really crazy significant changes other than the ones we've talked about.
So the general fund, the 2016 actual was 3.6. This is just the top line. The 2017 revised was 5.6. Is that because of Emerald Ash Borer? That's a big jump. What was the big jump from?
Where are you
I'm just looking
looking?
at the top line.
Okay. Yeah.
You sure?
Take it.
Okay. So in prior to 2017, we had the county portion of the city's portion of the countywide sales tax in a sales tax reserve fund. And within that fund, we were taking approximately $650,000 a year in maintenance programs, and then another $600,000 to $700,000 in small repair projects and CIP projects. And so what we started doing in 2017, if you recall, we closed the sales tax reserve fund. moved, and then moved those expenditures into the general fund and the park and recreation fund. And all those sales taxes stayed then within the general fund. And so that represents a portion. We tried to keep it at the same level that it was at in the sales tax reserve fund, but I think as Mark had pointed out, that we had cut some of the CIP items in the general fund this year. I don't recall off the top of my head how much that was, but it was cut, I think, about $300,000 down.
It certainly looks like a good place for a special paragraph.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I really appreciate that feedback, because again, we're working in this day in, day out, and typically, yeah, we would want to put that in there, so that makes a lot of sense.
So where would the emerald ash borer be at in the giant chart?
It's in the general fund's horticulture division budget.
Thank you.
One of the ways we kind of offset that expense increase in the general fund, we moved a position from general fund to rec fund. So it's a little bit of just a transfer of funds, but we were able to keep the general fund from just accelerating up by moving that position over.
I do feel as though we should somehow look at the projects for Parks and Rec and really take a close look at those. Not just because of golf. That's something I want to personally look at.
Are you? Yeah, I just want to, I want to make sure
I
we're.
don't have a list, so
Okay.
I feel like I had a list at some point and
Are-
I don't have a list.
So, and when we're talking about park and recreation, recreation, typically the programming for recreation programs are in the recreation fund. And then the park maintenance and the horticulture, those type of things are then in the general fund. I'm looking at Mark to see a head shake or not.
Yes, I'm nodding my head.
So, I think what we could do is bring back for you what you're seeing in the recreation, broke out a little bit by program. And then also, I definitely hear in the general fund, get an idea of the, like, park, what we're doing in the park maintenance. I just want to make sure I'm clear on that part.
Yeah, I guess just an itemized list, let's start there, so I can understand. I assume that the ice skating rink isn't scheduled for next year.
Yeah, and Mark, is that actually in the recreation program, or is that in the parks department?
The operation of the skate rink?
Right.
It's in the recreation budget.
Okay.
I think one thing that's important is when we're talking about the general fund, I'm glad that it was changed so that those funds were put into the general fund. That we need to take, I guess, more of a closer look when we're talking about prioritizing across departments. Because, I mean, I think Parks and Rec is great. I think it's just so much fun, you know?
Thanks.
And the facilities and such, I think it's great. It's nothing against them personally. But when I start prioritizing across departments, then you kind of have to look at those more recreational, beautifying type things and think about in terms of if we perhaps take some cuts here, then we wouldn't have to raise the mill levy for, you know, the police facility, 1.25 mil. Because I assume that's coming out of the general fund, the 1.25.
Well, it's coming in the debt service fund, which is one of the 3 property tax funds that we have, so, yeah.
Geo debt service is not technically general fund, but it all redounds down to the taxes and the millage rate.
Right.
Mayor, I would suggest that as we move to priority-based budgeting, you'll see a lot more of that. That the first kind of step in that is identifying the different programs. So each department may have their adult sports, youth sports, to use the Parks and Rec example. And I think that's kind of going to get you what you're looking for in terms of being able to say, okay, I may prioritize youth sports over downtown beautification or vice versa. So
Right.
I think we're moving in that direction. The first key to that, though, will be us going through the exercise of identifying those all out as programs. And unfortunately, we haven't had the time to do that between the strategic plan getting adopted in March and bringing this to you all at this point. But that's definitely in our plan of carrying out that priority initiative about priority-based budgeting.
Yeah. I think the elephant in the room, you know, is I think it was valid criticism about, from the public's perspective, that Sports Pavilion Lawrence was prioritized over the facility. You know, we always have to keep that kind of big picture criticism. And how would we address that when someone asks us, you know, well, how are you actually prioritizing public safety over recreational activities?
As I'm listening, I think maybe to a graph that might be helpful is, we have a pie chart in there that shows expenditures by departments across all funds. And I think that may be kind of a helpful place to look at as we talk about where we are prioritizing. You can see that on page 90, that we're talking about Parks and Rec is 6.8% of the total of our expenditures across all departments, all funds. Police Department, 12.6%. Let's see, Public Works, 18%. So I think that's a good place to look when you're answering that kind of a question, that here's a good representation of where our priorities really lie in terms of where our funding is going. I don't know if Tom would have any other comments about that, but that's the way I see it.
I guess I should just say now that I don't really want to raise the mill levy if we don't have to. So I'm looking for things that can be lengthened out perhaps another year or so. Thank you.
Mayor and Commissioners, Dave Wagner, Director of Utilities. I want to relate a couple of things right off the bat that we're doing that I think coincides with what you have talked about with strategic planning, and at least give a couple of examples there on what we're doing with critical success factors and some examples of that. Obviously, I think when you think of utilities, you think of core services and infrastructure. One of the area that I think is taken a little bit more for granted in what we do is safe and healthy neighborhoods. And I bring up the issues that we face and the programs that we're instituting and working hard on to ensure that we have a quality of drinking water that's beyond the regulatory requirements, especially in those areas that have impacts on chronic health issues, things like disinfection byproducts. Lead, obviously, is on everybody's mind when they're thinking about water today, as well as algal toxins. I think, and I wish Chief Bradford was here because I'd like to take a little credit for what he does, but because he does such a good job. But part of that ISO 14 or ISO rating on the fire department that they do such a great job on, we'll take a little credit for that in about 38 some odd points of that rating. So it's a significant portion of that, and I'd like to bring that up. I think in the other areas, collaborative services, we talk a lot about working with the county, but it's also improved a lot just recently with what we're doing within the city. Working with finance department, integrating and working on meter services, those 3 reductions of FTEs that you saw. That group used to be 11 people, it's now 7 people, and we're doing more work than we did before with that group, and working with Brian and his staff and finding efficiencies. With assuming the adoption of advanced metering infrastructure, we'll even be able to bring that crew down further. We believe to a crew of about 5. I think in the other areas, we've been working with Chuck sitting behind me on stormwater, on doing some collaboration with there, where utilities department has designed and done the integration services for the control systems there. Our operators are monitoring that, and we're working on maintenance together, where we used to do that apart. That collaboration is proving to give us some efficiencies across departments. I think the other area that I want to bring up is a little bit on what we're doing that's innovative in the area that is conservation as well as efficiency. It won't be very long before we have the ability to look at every piece of equipment and every process unit and see what the real-time cost in energy as well as chemicals are for that process unit or that piece of equipment. That's going to help us make better decisions on a cost basis than what we currently can do today. So those are some of the things that I think we're doing that are listening to what the strategic plan said, that the budget that we have in front of you supports. Given that, some significant changes, and Lisa, I haven't forgot your question. I'm going to answer that. But after I get done, we're also going to turn it over to Mike to give you a little bit of a brief update on rates as well, so you know what it takes to support what we're asking for. The Wakarusa facility, we expect to be operational in January of this year. That is a significant change in the budgets and our operational cost. It's, even though you say it's a 2.5 million gallon a day facility and the existing one's a 12 million gallon a day facility, they are significantly different in the quality of the product that they, and the service that they provide with nearly complete nutrient removal. The existing facility doesn't do that. So it's not comparing apples to apples when you look at that. So it's energy intensive, it's chemical intensive, and it's very, very mechanical. I think the other thing is obviously on the CIP side, we're looking at a new CIP plan that you guys have been reviewing that we've supplied. That budget increase and that revenue increase of 8% is designed to help move that through for the next 5 years. That includes the advanced metering infrastructure, which we believe will provide additional information for us operationally, but also we'll be working with Brian and customer service people to provide a lot better information to the customer about what their usage is, and so they can manage their own water, even from a quality perspective, not just based on a quantity perspective as well. I think we're continuing to repair and have a long list of things to do that's buried underground that nobody sees until it breaks. Water lines and sewer lines specifically, and that's been a major focus of what we've done. It would continue to be a major focus. For a long, long time, we were just like a lot of other utilities. That was a deferred maintenance item. We still have I think it's a 25-year program to catch up on water line replacement. And so job security for engineers in our work group on project managing those. I know Commissioner Boley, we've impacted your neighborhood with that, but we know it's a mess when we go through, but we also go, guess what, you got a new water line. So hopefully we won't be back unexpectedly. That's what costs a lot of money. So we're going to continue to do that. One outcome I like to point out, 2 weeks ago we had a weekend where we had 3 inches of rain. We had no calls, no sewer backups, no plugs. The system performed very, very well. And for anybody that's been around Lawrence for very long, Commissioner Amix may remember that. On a weekend like that, they used to pile up the call tickets by the lots of tens and hand those to all the on-call staff. We don't see that anymore, which is a payback. It's going to take continued work to sustain that, but it certainly is proof that I think with commission support on CIP programs that we've made some headway and we're getting better results than we had before. So with that, Commissioner Larson, your question, the 8% revenue increase, and I'll steal a little bit of bullet out of what Mike's probably going to tell you, approximately 4% of that revenue need would go to operations of the Wakarusa facility and extended operations, plus I believe, and Brian may correct me, some additional debt service. So if you look at our graph, you'll see a big bump in debt service there. The other 4% would go to support the next 5-year program for CIP projects. So that's a real general breakdown of what that split and what that revenue would go for. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mike unless you have additional questions of me, but I'll obviously be here after that if you want to go.
Before you do that, Mike, you're the only thing standing between the city commission and dinner.
I'll be brief. Wow.
You read cues very well.
Pretty good negotiating,
Yeah, I think that was a directive. So, given that, I will be quick. From the meeting that we had back in November where we kind of shared rate methodologies with you, the consensus from the commission was that we move forward with an individual inclining block rate going forward. And as we began to look into that, one of the things that we found was the current billing system does not support the ability to do an individual inclining block rate. And so in our CIP program that we currently have for AMI, one of the things that was in that AMI was replacement of the billing system. We were looking at that at the end of the AMI project, and now we've kind of focused that at the beginning of the AMI project. And we will be implementing that over the next year so that come 2019, we'll be able to implement that individual inclining block rate going forward.
Dave kind of discussed the revenues. And so moving on to the 2018 to 2022 system development charges, sorry.
Not yet. Sorry.
Back one, yep. When we run the model on those, for that 5-year period, the sewer SDCs will remain unchanged for that 5-year period, and the water SDCs will remain unchanged in 2018, with a modest increase in 2019, and then again in 2021. As we did in the previous 5-year SDC program, we've shared that information with the Lawrence Home Builders Association because, as you can imagine, they're very interested in system development charges they pay when they get meters. And then finally, updating our fees to recover some cost of services. These are some miscellaneous fees that were adopted by resolution in 1994, and there have been no changes to those fees since. That would be for our 5/8 meter installation and our 1-inch meter installation. And so what we're looking at is just updating those costs to recover what it costs us today. And then the last fee would be a sewer TV inspection. And then, sorry, now the last slide here. This is just for the 2018 rates. You can see we've highlighted Lawrence's 2017 rates and then the Lawrence preliminary 2018 rate. And we're kind of comparing that with some of the surrounding communities' 2017 rates. Those communities are all in the same budget process that we are, and they're looking at revenue increases anywhere from 4 to 9%. And so that just kind of shows our increase for an average customer at 4,000 gallons of water and 4,000 gallons of sewer. The increase is $4.65. And then again, we kind of touched on this graph a little bit in that debt service is one of the big drivers in our increase in the O&M budget. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
So we have a small consent agenda starting at 5:45. We do typically take public comment at the end of the staff presentation. If somebody, maybe by a show of hands, you can find out how many people wish to comment at this stage regarding the budget work session. And if it's a fair number, maybe we can hold it until afterwards. But if there's someone that wants to make a brief comment so that they can move on with their evening, maybe you want to accommodate that. But
Does that sound good to the commission? Yeah. Is there anyone that was wanting to speak in public comment? I guess no one wanted to speak about public comment right now. Something brief, perhaps.
So everybody's good with the budget?
See you guys later.
don't push it.
It's good, like we're ready to, but we're not officially adjourning. Are we officially adjourning and then we restart?
Yeah.
Recessing to the 5:45.
Okay, we are recessing until 5:45. Thanks, Dave. and now we're going to go into our more typical agenda where we first have proclamations. So we're going to proclaim the week of May 14th through the 20th as Police Week, and Monday, May 15th is Peace Officers Memorial Day. So do we have a representative?
New Mayor, Commissioners, thanks for having us.
Does that raise at all? There's an arrow over there. We got to make it go up or down at least one time during a meeting. That's our comic relief of the night.
Works for me. I do kind of like what you guys talked about earlier. The city manager said something about National Police Year, coming up, budget year, so that's good. Let's keep that train of thought. Now, on a serious note, appreciate the proclamation tonight. As you know, law enforcement continues to be a very, very challenging job. Every day, law enforcement officers and other public safety officials go out there and put their lives at risk and their emotional well-being at risk to serve the community. Certainly that occurs also here in Lawrence, Kansas. So having the governing body do this proclamation as a show of support for law enforcement and the harm that we put ourselves into serving the community is very much appreciated.
Well, reading the shift reports, certainly I can't imagine doing half of that. So we appreciate it. So let me read the proclamation here. Whereas established in 1962 by President John F. Kennedy in a joint resolution in Congress designating May 15th as Peace Officers Memorial Day and the week in which May 15th falls as National Police Week, and whereas the members of the law enforcement agencies of the City of Lawrence and Douglas County play an essential role in safeguarding the rights and freedoms of citizens throughout the city and county, and whereas it is important that all citizens know and understand the duties, responsibilities, hazards, and sacrifices of their law enforcement agencies, and that members of our law enforcement agencies recognize their duty to serve the people by safeguarding life and property, by protecting them against violence and disorder, and by protecting the innocent against deception and the weak against oppression. And whereas each May during National Police Week, the nation pauses to recognize and honor the men and women of our law enforcement agencies who increasingly provide a high level of accountable, essential, and professional public service. Excuse me. Therefore, I, Leslie, Mayor of the city, do hereby proclaim May 14th through 20th as Police Week, and Monday as Peace Officers Memorial Day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you. Goodness gracious. My eye water doing that. Is there some Kleenex nearby? It made my eye tear up doing that. Can't really read when one of my eyes is watering. Oh, jeez. All right. Sorry, guys, poor timing. Okay, so now we're on to the consent agenda. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, the item will be removed and considered separately. Any items the commission wishes to remove? Any items a member of the public wishes to remove? All right. All right, so I'll take a motion to approve the consent agenda with the, I'm getting there, with the inclusion of claims in the amount of $4,042,665.17 for a total vendors of 191 vendors.
So moved.
So motion made by Vice Mayor Boley, seconded by Commissioner Larson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right, so it looks like we're on to public comment. Is anyone going to do public comment? Because then I will read the paragraph. But if no one is going to, I'm not going to read it. All right. God bless you all. Okay, so now we're on to commission items. Do commissioners have any items? Nothing at all? Okay. City manager's report, looks like there's none. Calendar. Any calendar items to discuss? You guys are too easy. And of course, Tuesday, July 4th is 4th of July, so we don't have a meeting. So in July, we'll only have 2 meetings on Tuesdays. All right, 2 Tuesdays. Okay, well, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
There's a, I'm sorry, there's a new officer swearing in ceremony on the 15th, is that correct?
8 a.m.
On the
Monday.
15th? I thought it got moved to the,
Yeah, it's moved to
yeah,
another day.
On the 15th.
yeah, but the swearing in did get moved to the,
Well,
no, to the
no.
30th. Right?
I'm swearing in one officer on the 15th, but then I'm also swearing in
The
the academy.
academy is on the 2nd of June.
Right.
And that's the one that got moved.
No, I didn't know there were 2 of them.
So there's two different events.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, we better put both those on there. if they're not.
Right. So I just wanted to make sure that people knew that there was the swearing in on the 15th. I'm planning on being there. I don't know if anybody else is.
Yeah, I was planning on being at the 15th.
Okay, so that's on the
We
calendar.
better
Yeah.
put those on the calendar.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's one on the 15th and one on the 30th.
Yeah.
30th was originally scheduled.
On the 2nd. That's the one that I was
Okay.
talking about that got moved. It's now 8 a.m. on the 30th, correct?
So that's 8 a.m. on the 30th. Okay,
Yeah, and
so
I
let's
w-
get both those on the calendar.
Yeah, I'll be at the 30th one.
Yeah, we need both of them on there.
And are they both at the ITC?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
All right, thank you for clarifying
It's
that.
a lot of,
Something else?
No, that'll do. Thanks.
Okay, so it looks like we're adjourning the entire meeting then. And so let's make the motion together.
so moved. Move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, so motion made by Commissioner Herbert to adjourn, seconded by Commissioner Amix. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, guys. Good gravy.
Falling apart on us.